Hey YouTube, today we are talking about mountain bike sizing and fit, why it is so important, why sizing charts based on height are bullshit, and how you can make sure you get the right size bike the first time before you spend thousands of dollars. First off, I just want to thank my first 50 subscribers. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for the support. Every bit helps. So thank you for subscribing, liking, and commenting. Speaking of comments, today's video is kicked off by a comment from My Keyboard is Broken. It reads, "Mate, awesome review. Thanks for so many details. I'm currently struggling with size. Since I'm also 6'2", and based on the updated sizing chart on Commencal's website, I should fit with a size large. And you, being the same height, have an extra large. That's a bit odd, smiley face. Would you switch to a large if you had the chance? Or can a shorter stem fix fitting?" Thank you, My Keyboard is Broken, for the comment and for alerting me that Commencal updated their sizing chart. We're talking particularly about the Meta AM29, which this has given me the perfect opportunity to explain why sizing charts are bullshit. And no, I would not switch to a large if I had the chance. In fact, I don't think I'm ever buying a size large ever again, unless we're talking about maybe the pull machine where the XL has a reach of like 535 or something crazy. So that doesn't mean that you should get an XL though. So stay tuned because we're going to talk about the best way to find your size. I also want to read one more comment. This one is from our MTB Journey. I've put in my order for the Meta AM as well. Mine is the essential version. I'm also 6'2", and they said I would be in the XL size. So how do you like the feel of the XL? This has been the part I wonder about. Great video. All right, so which is it? If you are 6'2", what size should you actually get? This is a really common problem for people of our height because for some reason every mountain bike manufacturer has chosen 6'2" or 188 centimeters as the cutoff between size large and extra large, or between size 4 and 5 if you are new school fancy. Thank you, Specialized and Gorilla Gravity. This was the case with Commencal earlier this year with the 2021 Meta AM29. I'll throw up that old chart for you, but the new chart has the cutoffs between all the sizes changed dramatically. If this has you confused, or you're in between sizes on this new size chart, the old size chart, or any bike manufacturer's size chart for that matter, stay tuned because we are going to go over the best way to size your mountain bike. Okay, so if you want some big proof about why sizing charts are bullshit, all we have to do is take a look at two recent bikes, both very similar. In fact, these are the two bikes that I was debating about getting: the Commencal Meta AM or the new Kona Process X. So if we look at their charts, so we can see that for the Commencal Meta with the new chart, they say that the XL, you can be as tall as 6'9" riding this XL. And if we go over to look at the Kona Process X, which actually has an even longer reach, the XL has a reach of 525, and they show that the XL only accommodates up to a 6'5" person. And I also find this crazy that their XL says that you can be as small as 5'11". So their XL range is 5'11" all the way to 6'5". So it's crazy. These charts seem to be based on whether or not you feel like we should be riding larger bikes with bigger reaches or not. And I feel like Commencal's original chart seemed to reflect, yes, we should be riding these larger bikes, and so we're keeping this chart as an XL, 6'2" and up. But now with the XL starting at a 6'4", they seem to be saying, no, we're actually even though our bikes are bigger, we're going to keep the older standard. And these larger reach numbers are going to be for larger people. And so I actually like the chart for the Kona Process X. Their chart seems to reflect, yeah, our bikes are bigger because they should be. So first I want to talk about why mountain bike sizing is so important. It's so important because mountain biking is dangerous. With road cycling, the goal is to find the most aggressive position that you can maintain on the bike over a long period of time with the highest wattage output. But with mountain biking, the fastest you will ever go is not when you are in the saddle pedaling. It's when you are out of the saddle, going downhill, riding as fast as you can without dying. So what is the most important aspect of our bikes that enables us to ride faster and safer? It's grip. The more confident you are in your grip, particularly the front end, the faster you can rip corners and the faster you can brake. If you can slow down quickly, then that confidence enables you to ride at faster speeds. Losing traction is how crashes happen, but confidence in your traction is what enables you to ride faster. So it makes sense that we should be sizing our mountain bikes based on maximizing grip. We should be trying to find the position on our mountain bikes that gives us the most amount of grip with the least amount of effort. So mountain bike sizing is so important because if you are riding the wrong size bike, you could be sacrificing traction, maneuverability, and balance, and ultimately safety while riding downhill. Now there is a science to this, and I've learned it the same way you learn anything, by getting it wrong, wronger, and wrong again. In my 4 years of mountain biking, I've gone through 3 different bikes that did not fit before finally figuring it out with my 4th bike, which you guys know is the 2021 Commencal Meta AM 29 size XL. So you might be thinking, there are only 4 sizes, how did you get this wrong so many times? Well, that's why I'm making this video, because the current sizing system is terrible and there are no standards between bike manufacturers of what the sizes mean. A size large in today's bikes is completely different from a size large a decade ago. And especially with this latest batch of 2021 bikes, we are seeing an even greater difference. So it's not just as simple as knowing your size label. So in this video, I'm going to take you through my expensive 4-bike journey, teach you what I've learned along the way, hopefully save you from making the same mistakes, and at the end I'm going to show you the tools that I use to make this way easier. So that leads me to mistake number 1. I bought a bike on Craigslist, but that is not the mistake I made. The mistake I made was buying a bike from someone 4 inches shorter than I was, and listening to him when he told me that it fits me. I was a total noob. I had no idea what a properly fitting mountain bike should feel like, so when he said it fits me, I was thinking, okay, yeah, I'm only 4 inches taller, which is probably within the range where I can just raise the seat, raise the handlebars, and it'll fit, right? Like, I'm not that much taller than you. So I bought it. It was a 2008 or 9 Santa Cruz Blur in a size large. I paid $1,000 for it, and as you can probably tell, was way too small for someone 6'2". There are current 2020, 2021 bikes listed as XL that I still don't think are big enough. So this size large with ancient geometry was way too small. So this is a picture of me just before crashing hard at the very beginning of my ride. I ended up with scars on both arms while riding this bike because it was so small I could not balance on it or keep myself from going over the bars to save my life. I was crashing so often that I eventually decided that I was not going to ride ever again until I bought a bigger bike. I ended up putting it back on Craigslist, and in the ad I specifically stated the reason I was selling the bike was that it was too small and that anybody 6'2" or taller need not apply. So what happened? a 6'2" dude came and bought it from me despite me telling him how extremely frustrated I was with how small it was. So lesson number 1, don't buy the wrong size bike just because it's all you can find in your price range. I know why he bought it. It's for the same reason that I bought it. It was the only low price option available because it was old. But since it had XTR components, it was still pretty nice. So this was the only bike on Craigslist with hydraulic brakes and a dropper post for $1,000. It can be so tempting to buy a bike even though you know it probably isn't perfect just because it's got the right price tag or the right components that you've been looking for. I shouldn't have bought a bike from someone 4 inches taller than me or shorter than me, and he shouldn't have bought a bike from someone the same height who was frustrated with how small it was. We both made the mistake of thinking that because we could get the seat high enough to pedal up and down the street that it was an okay fit. So that leads me to mistake number 2. So for my next bike, I wanted the best bang for my buck, but I also knew that I needed something to help me figure out what the right size was because I did not want to make that mistake again. Little did he know. So this attracted me to Canyon because at the time they had something called the perfect positioning system. I measured and entered 6 different body measurements into their calculator and it said that I should get a large. Now, my first inclination was to get an XL, but I decided to trust the system because, hey, perfect was in the title, and since bikes have gotten way bigger over the last decade, I figured that a current size large would still be way bigger than the large I had, and that it might actually be the right size, especially if the manufacturer has 6 different measurements from me and is telling me so. So I bought a 2018 Canyon Drive in a size large, and it was good. It was perfect for me to learn on. I stayed on this bike for over a year, and as far as I knew, it was perfect until I got a temporary gig out in California near Santa Cruz, near the Soquel Demonstration Forest, where there are 2 amazing trails next to each other, each with different disciplines. One is quite possibly the country's best flow trail with immaculate berms, and the other is Braille, a very steep technical descent with lots of jumps and drops. Both are amazing trails, but Flow is seriously world class and is possibly one of the best trails in the country. Everyone raves about it, but I was struggling to enjoy it because I couldn't figure out how to ride the berm to save my life. I found more flow on Braille. When I was on the wrong size bike, I found that my favorite kind of riding was straight, steep, and fast. Why? Because on the wrong size bike, balancing my weight between the front end and back end to maintain grip while turning and leaning the bike was extremely difficult. I felt like I was threading the needle to find the perfect position in every corner, which resulted in me feeling off balance through every turn. So I was having to take turns very slowly, which is the opposite of the goal on a flow trail. But on the faster, steeper trails without many turns, I could cruise down as fast as I wanted without worrying about grip because the smaller bike forced me into the back seat. And so I was already in the position I needed to be riding a steeper trail. Soquel Demo is a very popular destination for bike riding, so eventually I came across someone riding an extra large Canyon Drive, and he let me ride it a little, and as soon as I sat on it, I knew that I had made the wrong choice. I definitely needed the XL. So I called Canyon, but they were discontinuing the 27.5 version of the Strive, and so they didn't have any XL frames that they could give me. Lesson number 2, don't trust any kind of complicated calculator system to tell you what size bike you need. When Canyon told me that they couldn't help me, I got on their website and I looked at their new 29er Strive, and they had updated their perfect positioning system for it. I was definitely not going to buy it, but I wanted to see what it would say for my size. So I put in the same measurements that I had before a year earlier, and it said that this bike is not for you, and we recommend you take a look at our other bikes. So yeah, so much for perfect positioning system. So this leads me to mistake number 3. I'm stuck with a $4,500 bike that didn't fit me while I'm living next to some of the country's best mountain bike trails. I wasn't gonna let that fly because I thought the solution was simple. I just needed a size XL, right? I had made this costly mistake 2 times now, but I've got it figured out, just need an XL. So I got on Craigslist and found a used, very well spec'd, extra large Ibis Mojo HD4, and I lived happily ever after. When I got it out on the trails, it was definitely better, but only marginally. In hindsight, I figured out that the XL Mojo HD4 has an even smaller stack height than the large drive, and the reach of the Mojo HD4 was only 12 millimeters longer than the Strive, so this bike was nearly the same size. So shortly after buying it, I took it to a local shop to get some work done, and after telling my story to one of the techs, he offered to size me using one simple measurement. I said sure, and what he did next is what completely changed how I would size my bikes in the future. He had me stand on this thing called a rip row, which is an exercise machine for mountain bikers, but I stood with my feet in a way that simulated having my feet on the pedals, and then I had my hands on the handlebars, and I stood up straight and held the bars down low like I had just reached the top of a deadlift. He then measured from the bottom of the rip row machine to the height of my middle knuckle, and he said that that was my rider area distance, or RAD. He then took the measuring tape to my bike and measured from the center of the bottom bracket up to the handlebars. When he did this, he said I should probably get a longer stem and also some taller riser bars. This should have been my first clue that this bike was still not large enough, because I already had a 50 millimeter stem and 20 millimeter riser bars. But I was really impressed by how he knew all of this from one measurement from my body that correlated to just one measurement on the bike, especially after being frustrated with Canyon's 6 measurement system. I found out that all of this comes from Lee McCormick, who wrote a book about mountain bike fit called Dialed. I bought the book and did my RAD measurement over and over again until I finally caved and got the larger rise handlebars. I went with 50 millimeter rise, which was huge. This new setup helped a ton, and I continued to get better and faster over the course of the next year. But I eventually hit another wall where I was struggling to maintain my front end grip through higher speed turns. So lesson number 3, don't assume that bike manufacturers use similar sizing. Always check the numbers. It turned out that going by Canyon's geometry, the XL Ibis was only a half a size larger than the large Strive. Always use the stack and reach numbers to determine a bike's true size. I like to put the numbers into a triangle calculator, set a 90-degree angle, and actually calculate the distance from the bottom bracket to the top of the head tube to see how close that number is to my ideal RAD, which is 890 for me. I don't want it to be too close. I need to leave room for the height and length of the stem and also the height of my handlebars. For example, when I plug in the numbers of my Meta AM, I get 830 and my RAD is 890. I measured the RAD of the Meta AM out of the box and it was dead on 890. So the stock 40 millimeter stem and the stock 27 millimeter rise bars added about 60 millimeters of RAD, and that was with one 5 millimeter spacer under the stem. Now 830 was a whole lot closer to 890 than the 784 that measured on my Ibis. I was never quite able to get the IBIS up to 890, even with higher bars and a longer stem. So I'm sure there is some perfect geometry formula for figuring it out, but it seems like going with a bike that has 50 to 70 millimeters less than your ideal RAD gives you enough wiggle room to play around with stem spacers, stem length, and handlebar rise. So, mistake number 4. This last summer, I was lucky enough to have a pass to a lift serviced bike park that I got to ride nearly every weekend. And repeatedly riding the same trails every week helped me figure out that something was still wrong. I was still riding the IBIS with the riser bars, but I was starting to really have trouble keeping grip on the front end around corners. What I ended up figuring out is that I should have listened to the bike tech about getting both larger riser bars and a longer stem. By increasing my stack height alone to get closer to my RAD of 890, this put me in far too upright of an attack position. The distance between my bottom bracket and handlebars was almost ideal, but the ratio of stack height to reach was way off from my body proportions. I'm tall, but most of my height comes from my torso and not my legs. I also have a +2 ape index, which means that my wingspan is 2 inches larger than my height. So all this means that when I'm in an attack position and I pivot at the hips, in order to be able to properly really stretch out over the bike, my bars need to be further forward and lower. If they are too close and too high, I'm going to be forced into the back seat and my back will be compressed uncomfortably. And without being able to have my arms stretched out far in front of me, I completely lose the range of motion for turning and too much of my weight is in the back. If your weight is already too far back, when you compress down into your legs through a nice berm, it's only going to put even more weight on the rear. This is why I could feel the loss of grip in my front end through every tight turn. So to correct this, I started experimenting with longer and longer stems. I went to a 70mm stem and then eventually to an 80mm stem, lowering the stack height each time to make sure I maintain the same RAD number. My ability to handle corners improved immensely, but an 80mm stem with 800mm wide bars feels like shit. The steering was so erratic through anything technical, and the steering was so sensitive that I could basically steer the bike telepathically. Hardly any movement at all was necessary to turn. So this actually made the bike pretty scary to ride at high speeds, and that's how I ended up with the conclusion that I needed a bike with more reach so that I could use a shorter stem. So I took the reach number of my bike, which was 480, and added the length of the stem that felt best, which was 80, and then subtracted the length of the stem that I would actually want, which was 40. I figured a 40mm stem would leave me room to experiment going lower to a 35 or even bigger up to a 50 if I needed to. So this is how I found the new Meta AM29, a reach of 520 being my perfect match. So when I got the new Meta AM, it did not feel perfect right away despite having the RAD measure at 890 right out of the box. It still took some experimenting with bar height and stem length to find a position that naturally gave me great traction. Riding a bike with a massive reach was completely new to me, and so at first the bike did feel too big. So I tried a smaller stem, actually down all the way to a 33mm stem, and I liked the way it made the bike feel more maneuverable with more linear steering, but I started to really notice how hard I had to work to maintain my front end grip. What I ended up doing is having someone take pictures of me while riding the bike to see if it appeared like I was too far on the back end, and sure enough I was. So I went back up to the 40mm stem and did some riding and noticed that the front end grip was just always there. I didn't have to worry about it, but I did notice that my back end was sliding around way more, which I typically like, but this was sliding more than I liked. So I came to the conclusion that I needed to move my weight back just a smidge to get a better balance. Now I could do this by raising my handlebars, but that adds more distance to your RAD. So if I was going to raise the bars, I also needed to move them closer. So luckily the same company that makes the 33mm stem also makes a 38mm stem, which I just put on last week and it felt amazing. So I highly recommend the Spank Split stem for their weird sizing that they have if you come to the same conclusion that I did, knowing that you need just a small change. So my bike fits now. It feels perfect. I would never want the size large after what I figured out that my body needs a long reach. Now you might be completely different and you might be the opposite. You might have most of your height from your legs and a normal torso or average torso, or maybe you have an ape index that is negative and your wingspan is shorter than you are tall. And so all these things factor in to determine really what your best stack to reach ratio is. You can figure that out on your own bike, just like I did with my Ibis. You can start experimenting with stem length and your bar height, your stack height, to figure out what starts to give you more or less grip. What starts to make you feel like in the attack position you don't have to really modulate your forward and rear position to maintain grip. You can just stay in a nice low position, turn left, right, and not have to feel like you're out of balance forward and back. So with this information, if you are looking for the perfect fit, you may not be able to just buy any bike from your favorite bike manufacturer. For instance, I really wanted a Santa Cruz Mega Tower, but when I looked at the numbers, the XL had the right size stack, but way too short of a reach. The XXL had the right size reach, but way too large of a stack. Either size would have been a compromise in some way. Sure, I maybe could have slammed the stem and used bars with zero rise, but I figured getting a bike that required the least amount of modifying would ensure that my ride characteristics are as close as possible to the frame designer's intentions. So that's why I'm glad I ended up with the Meta 29, where the only change I really needed to make was just a slightly shorter stem and wider handlebars. There is a really great website out there that I used to look at current bikes that might have the dimensions that I'm looking for. It's great. You can filter by the kind of bike, the size of travel that you're looking for, wheel size, full suspension hardtail, but you can put in the range that you are looking for reach and the range that you are looking for a stack. And if you know like your exact ratio, like for me, since I know that the Meta AM is perfect, I can take the stack, divide it by the reach, and know exactly what my stack reach ratio is, and I can put that in, and I can just see all bikes that have that similar ratio between the two. And so that's probably how I'm gonna find future bikes. Yeah, this website is perfect. It's free. I love the different price comparisons it has. It'll show you if the bike you're looking at has a good deal on the components compared to other bikes in the same range. And it's got the actual geometry numbers, and I love this picture of the frame actually gets generated from the actual dimensions that are listed for the bike, so you can kind of see what the frame looks like. And eventually if you start looking at frames for hours a day, every day while searching for a bike, you start to learn just by looking at a bike, you know, instantly you can tell if it is one that is going to fit you or not. So I really recommend this website for finding new bikes. The next website I want to talk about is this stem comparison tool. Now, if you are doing some experimenting with changing stem size, this website is great to figure out what it's going to do to the size. So you can put in the angle of the head tube, and you can put in the size of your stack, so that's including half of the size of your stem, and then the amount of spacers underneath, and you can compare two different configurations. So you can compare the same size stem with just different stack height, so you can figure out what that is going to do to your bike size and to your reach. And you can also put in a completely different stem. You can put in different angles of the stems to see how that changes the reach. And so this is one of the tools that I would use anytime I was thinking about maybe changing the stem. So I want to show you guys how exactly to measure your RAD at home of yourself and then also of your current bike. So all you need is your riding kit. You need to be in the shoes that you're gonna wear riding, and you just need a pair, not a pair, but you need some handlebars that you can grab. And so you're just going to space your feet as close as you can to what they would actually be spaced on pedals. And you're going to stand tall, shoulders back, like you just did a deadlift. And you're going to have somebody measure from the floor to your middle knuckle. Measure both sides and then try to get an average. I think Lee McCormick in his book actually says to use the smaller or the larger one, I don't remember. I'll put that in the video. That is the number that should then correlate to your length from the bottom bracket to your handlebars. And the way you measure that is actually with a string that you would tie from the left side of the bars to the right side of the bars. And you want to wrap the string right around where your middle finger would be on the handlebars. And then you'll measure from the bottom bracket to the string. And if you can, Lee McCormick actually says to measure a centimeter below the string. And so that's something pretty easy to just get close. And then start experimenting with getting your RAD as close to what your measurement is as possible. But know that anytime you move the bars forward with a longer stem, the bars will probably need to go down to maintain the same RAD. And then it's the opposite. If you move the bars up, they may need to become closer with a shorter stem in order to maintain the same amount of RAD. And so you'll just want to experiment with different combinations of stems. But really what you can do is just have someone take pictures of you on the bike in the attack position. And you'll be able to see, does it look like you're really rear biased? Does it look like you're not able to get over the front? Or does it look like you are far too forward and your feet are not able to stay level? They're kind of leaning forward on the pedals because that stem is just too long. You'll be able to see that pretty easily. And on the trail, you'll be able to tell if your tires start sliding around. So step one for perfect mountain bike fit is know your RAD. Have someone help you measure your RAD with some handlebars and some measuring tape. Step two is know the RAD of your bike. Measure your bike's RAD with a string across the handlebars from the center of the bottom bracket up to about a centimeter below the string, and try to get these two numbers to correlate. And then step three is know your body. So know if you have a long torso or a short torso. Know if you have long arms or short arms. Know if most of your height comes from your legs or from your torso. Figure that out so that you can match a bike's stack to reach ratio to your body ratio. So if you have long legs, you probably need more stack and less reach. And if you have short legs, you probably need more reach and less stack. Another thing that I want to mention is that the size of your bike matters less in the beginning than it does as you start to get better and ride faster. Like this was my natural progression, is buying a bike that was too small and not knowing that until I started getting faster, then buying a bigger bike. And then as soon as I, leveled up again, I realized, oh, my bike needs to be bigger. And so really it's okay if your bike is too small, if you're a beginner or you are not going to be riding incredibly fast. But as you get better and get faster, that's when you'll start to notice these changes in traction. You'll start to notice you're having difficulty maintaining the proper attack position. And that's when you'll start to feel that your bike needs to be bigger. So I hope all this was helpful. I have links to everything I mentioned down in the description below. I highly recommend buying Dialed by Lee McCormick. His website is down below as well. That book will really give you the science behind why this works, as well as a lot more technical information on how to fine-tune your RAD. There's different benefits to having your bike be a little bit bigger than your RAD, a little bit smaller than your RAD, different ways to test to make sure you've got the right size other than just feel on the trail. So really valuable book. Check that out. Thank you for watching. Ride fast, don't die. So something I find that is crazy about all of this is that even if I was able to get the XL Canyon Strive frame, it still wouldn't have been big enough. Even if I had picked the biggest size that Canyon made, it still would not have fit me for my reach needs. And so what's crazy is that when I started doing research earlier this year, trying to find a bike with a reach of 520-ish, there were hardly any choices available. In fact, the two main choices that I was interested in weren't even out yet. So, you had the Commencal Meta AM, which I guess it was out. It came out in June, but it was sold out completely. And then there was the Kona Process X, was not out yet, just barely announced as I was researching. There were a handful of bikes made in the UK that had plenty of reach, but those were also very difficult to get a hold of. And so really there were just a handful of frames with the right amount of reach and stack that I needed. And so I think mountain biking is still in its infancy. We're still learning things about sizing, especially when it comes to taller riders. I have been on the forums. I've heard other tall riders talk about how they cannot get a bike large enough. I've heard of veteran riders that just buy the biggest bikes they can every year and they still wish for more reach. That's out there. You look at Greg Menard, who's only 6'3", yet Santa Cruz had to make him a custom XXL bike, and so there are plenty of riders out there. There are riders up in that 6'7", 6'9" range that there's no way that they're going to be able to have the same experience on any of these bikes that we are having. Earlier this year, I was at a bike park and I saw a dude who was tall. He said he was 6'7", and he was riding a bike that I could tell was way too small for him. I could see his back being hunched over. I asked him what he felt about his bike, and he thought it was the perfect size. And see, that's the thing, is taller riders don't know what it's supposed to feel like, because literally there's not a bike out there that they can ride that is the same experience of an average height rider who can just buy any medium or any large on the market and it mostly fits them. So this is frustrating for for taller riders, for people who just want the same experience as other people. I'm really hoping for this trend in numbers going up to continue. You know, if you watch the Grim Donut video, what that has shown us is that going longer and slacker is actually the right direction. It is actually faster. And so especially for us taller riders, getting a bike with the proper wheelbase and the proper reach is what's going to give us that confidence and that traction in order to ride quickly. And a lot of people are saying, you know, these longer bikes and the 29ers, they're just not as nimble, not as quick as the 27.5. I have found that to not be true. When I was able to get my Meta AM set up properly for me, I felt like it was more nimble than my 27.5 Ibis. And is really just about the sizing. Even though the bike was small, I still couldn't I couldn't rip it around corners because I was just struggling so much with the weight balance front and rear. But with a bike that I have that perfectly balanced, I can rip around those corners and I can make tight turns even better than I could with a smaller bike. So I really feel like the speed advantage you get from the confidence in a longer wheelbase in having the proper reach is just, it so far outweighs the small amount of maneuverability you get from, you know, a shorter bike with smaller wheels. So that's just my opinion. But I can say confidently that I am so glad that I picked the XL, and based on the current numbers, I don't think I'll ever be able to buy just a large in any bike other than the outliers like Pole and Kotick and Geometron, those companies. Unless these numbers keep going up. We gotta pump these numbers up. These are rookie numbers. 490 reach for a large? Come on. Come on.